Hey everybody, Justin Senior here, and we're talking about grouping strategy inside of section one of Social Ad Classroom. And you guys are going to really love this strategy. It's going to give you tons and tons of control over the way that you market on any social network, and it's really going to keep your costs down, which I'm sure a lot of you are going to love. You're going to be able to really efficiently test without spending a lot of money. So let's just jump right into it. So think about what we talked about in the video before this. The different layers of targeting, and you could see in the over the shoulder that you did there are tons and tons of interests for some specific niches. Just in the nursing niche, we could find over 100 targetable interests. In any healthy niche, in the dog niche, it's probably over 200 interests. Probably more than that. So think about when you have that many interests and you want to kind of test, you want to test as many as you can. And don't get me wrong, the name of the game in ads is testing and leveraging the data that you get from tests in as smart of a way as possible. But it's just simply too expensive and too time consuming to test 150 interests individually. So how do we solve that? The way that I've come up with and had some very, very great success with is by grouping interests into similar blocks. So that is super important. That if you could take one thing away from this video, it's about grouping interests as into blocks that are as similar as possible. So what exactly is an interest group? Well, that's a great question. An interest group is basically where you would, instead of finding individual interests, you would find top level categories where interests can be placed. So let's go back to that nursing example. So I could go in and we saw very briefly in the over the shoulder in the previous video, tons and tons of different nurse related interests. We had the demographics like job titles and field of study. We also had things like associations and different brands and different magazines and different events. I mean, we saw it all real briefly, and we saw that there are tons and tons of different interests. And like I said, we don't want to be sitting here testing 150 individual interests in 150 ad sets. That would just take forever, and it would also cost a lot of money. So what do? We create interest groupings, and we find the top level categories where those individual interests can be placed. So this is super important, right? We know that the interests are out there. We know what niche that we want to target. In this case, in this example, we're talking about the nurse niche. Now we need to find the kind of in-between. We need to find those categories, and maybe you want to call them subcategories of the niche or levels of the niche, whatever you want to call them. We want to find these different categories where we can start to add interests into the category. So the interest groupings are simply as many different categories of similar interests as possible. So, some of these will work in the nurse niche, some won't, but these are the types of interest groupings that you're looking for. You got job title, that's a demographic. You got field of study, that's a demographic. You have brands, that's going to be an interest. Celebrities, those will be interests. Associations, those will be interests. Groups, fan pages, events, magazines. You got blogs, you have stores, you have broad interests. So, almost all of them except the first two are going to be interest targets. And the list goes on. This is definitely not an exhaustive list. Like I said, it's going to differ niche to niche. But, this is going to be the most important part of your targeting research. Because when you find these top level categories, this will really allow you to test inside the niche without spending thousands of dollars. So basically, what you need to identify is the interest grouping categories. Obviously, once you are inside each interest group, you need to identify as many similar targetable interests as possible. So let's go back to the nurse niche, right? A great example of an interest group that is very successful in the nurse niche is the associations interest group. So first of all, let's just talk about why that would be a good interest group. So you have things like the American Nurses Association and National Student Nurses Association, et cetera, et cetera. Why would I be in a nurses association? I mean, there's literally zero reason for me to be in that unless I'm actually a nurse or plan to be a nurse or am very, very closely related to nursing, which in turn tells me that that is a pretty good interest group that I would want to advertise to, because I think that if this is a person that has elected to be in a nursing association, they're probably going to want my nurse t-shirt or my nurse jewelry or my ebook on best nursing schools or whatever it is. So what we need to do is now find as many associations as possible. And guess what? I couldn't even name you one association. I'm not a nurse. I don't have any friends that are nurses or family members that are nurses. I don't know really anything about nurses, but guess what? I don't need to know anything because I, just like you, have Google. So I'm going to go to Google and I'm going to type in something like, most popular nursing associations or, top nursing associations or just nursing associations, whatever. And I'm going to let Google kind of tell me where to start. So I'll go to Google and I'll see right off the bat, I'll see American Nurses Association and National Student Nurses Association. And then I'll see a Wikipedia page about, a list of nurses associations. So I know that there's, tons and tons and tons of them. All you have to do is basically in one window, you have Google open. And in the other window, you're building your, your interest grouping. And you're simply just adding as many interest groups as you can. And I'm sorry, you're adding as many interests inside of the interest group as you can. So, we want to have, 2, 3, 5, 10, 20, 100, as many as you can, as long as they're very similar. What I don't want you to do, I do not want you to contaminate an interest group with things that are not very similar. So I don't want to have the job title demographic mixed with the association interest group. That doesn't make sense to me. I want to have, while there certainly will be overlap, I want to basically have as clean of an interest group as possible. And the reason being is when I go to test that interest group, I could start to make assumptions that the entire interest group is somewhat uniform, right? If I'm a person that is in a nurse association, maybe I'm in the American Nurses Association, pretty likely that someone in the National Nurses United Association is going to be pretty like-minded. Sure, there are going to be some differences, but I think that is a great way to really kind of test and see where the buyers are coming from. The alternative to this would be let me test everything individually. Let me test American Nurses Association individually. Let me test National Student Nurses Association individually. That gets expensive quick. We talked about there's 10 plus targetable nurse associations. That would be 10 ad sets and 10 campaigns just for the association's interest group. So you save all that testing money by grouping them all together, but you still get the same effectiveness because basically person 1 all the way to person 100,000 in this audience should be pretty similar because it's the association interest group. So remember that. That's very important in terms of when you're testing. You don't want to contaminate these interest groups with anything else. So basically, you're going to repeat this step until you build as many interest groups as possible. And it's super important to keep your eyes open during the research. Again, I said I'm not an expert at the nurse niche. And, we talked about a couple of slides earlier. We talked about really the idea of the different types of interest groupings. And these will work for some niches, and some will be applied to some niche, some won't be applied to some niche. That's okay. But basically, you want to keep your eyes open during the research because you'll definitely uncover more interest groups that you would never even thought of from from your first pass at this. So keep your eyes open as you're building your interest groups. Again, you don't want to contaminate your interest group. But let's say I'm building this nurse association thing, and now all of a sudden I see a couple of interests for, an annual nursing convention. Now to me that says, okay, conventions and live events, maybe that's another interest group that I could eventually uncover for this niche. And, as I stated before, this research is super important. This will carry you through your entire niche. So you're going to be doing this, at the forefront, before you even run any ads. But this data that you're uncovering, these interest groups that you're building, these will stick with you forever. So, this is something super important that I tell my coaching students. Think about what's going to run out first. Are you going to run out of interest groups or are you going to run out of products? And, in every case, you're going to run out of interest groups first. Products are a dime a dozen, really. You can create, especially let's say we're talking about print-on-demand products, T-shirts and physical products, things like that. All it takes is me to have a designer create 100 different designs, and I just created 100 new products. But on the interest group side of things, there's only so many interests inside of Facebook, or inside of Pinterest or Instagram or whatever network we're talking about. Those will run out. So you need to master those as quickly as possible. You need to know where the buyers are coming from. And make no mistake about it, the amount of interest groups that you identify, that is 100% directly proportionate to the amount of money that you can make. And the more the better, right? So we want to find as many interest groups as possible. So let's do a quick over the shoulder. I'll show you how to build one interest group, and then you can go on and continue to build. And like I said, repeat the step until you build as many interest groups as possible, and always keep your eyes open. You never know what you might uncover. So let's go over the shoulder. Okay, so interest groupings. This is super important. This is where we're going to save tons and tons and tons of money on testing and still gather very, very, very valuable pieces of data. So we talked about, there could be 150 plus interests in a niche, and we simply can't test all 150 of them individually. It would be so expensive and it would be so time consuming that it would take us thousands of dollars just to prove if a niche is worth selling in or not. We want to do anything we can to make that number, that testing budget as small as possible, but we still want to gather enough data to let us make assumptions, strong assumptions of whether or not we should continue to stay in a niche or not. So remember we talked about finding the top level categories, and those could be, going back to the nurse example, some of the ones that we kind of brainstormed right off the top of our head: job title, field of study, brands, celebrities, associations, groups, fan pages, events, magazines, blogs, stores, broad interests, conventions, etc., etc. Those are all top level categories. So here's how I kind of want you to organize your thoughts here. And you could even kind of create a spreadsheet just like this. So again, this would be, assume this is our niche. So nurse is our niche, and these are interests in the nurse niche. What we need to find is the in-between. We need to find these, this section of this spreadsheet, fill this part out. And that is the interest grouping. So these are those top-level categories where interests can fall into. So basically, the way that you start is kind of just brainstorming off the top of your head, and this really gets easier based on the time that you spent inside the niche. Remember in that previous video, a couple videos ago, we talked about living inside the niche, how it's going to make your job easier. Well, if you spent some time in there, you were going to figure out. Remember, we saw an example, just the one of conventions. We saw an article about nursing conventions, so that could be an interest group. And we know that there's demographics that are targetable. So the job title should be an interest group. And then also field of study should be an interest group. We saw that in the demographics as well. That's where people will self-declare that they are, that they studied nursing in school. How about some other ones? Magazines are a typical one. In almost any niche, there's going to be magazines, right? Maybe in the sports niche, there's Sports Illustrated and ESPN the magazine and Sporting News. Well, nursing magazines, there's probably a great deal of those. And how about associations? Think about any job. There's normally going to be some associations group or a union group. And with nurses, for sure we know that those exist. Now, let's say you struggle to even get past number 2, right? You saw conventions and you saw job titles. Otherwise, you kind of didn't know where to go. Well, we have a plethora of data on Google, so we're just going to kind of take some of the the top level these top level categories that could be applied anywhere, and we'll see if we could apply them to our specific niche. So in this case, we're going to see if we can apply associations and groups and fan pages, events, magazines, blogs, stores, celebrities, brands. Can we apply those to the nursing niche? And we're going to use Google to kind of help us. Okay, so let's open up Google and kind of just poke around and see what we find. So with the nurse niche, we know that there is the job title and the field of study demographic, and we can kind of prove that real quick. Just going into demographics and going into work and job titles and nurse, and we see all these different nursing interests. So that could definitely be an interest group that works. And then how about in field of study? So education, fields of study, nurses, maybe even nursing. So we have 2 options there. And then, here's a good example, keeping your eyes open and finding another one. How about under work, industries, and then nurses? So there's another one that we didn't know beforehand, but it does exist. I'm sorry, so industries, which is the demographic. So that could be another interest group. But going back to Google, we're going to just test it out. So maybe we don't know if there are any nurse magazines. Let's just type in nurse magazines, see what comes up. So let's see, we have Nurse.com magazine, National Nurses United, Johns Hopkins Nursing Magazine, Advance for Nurses, Minority Nurse. So it looks like there's a pretty good chance that we should be able to find Scrubs magazine. We should be able to find a good amount of nurse interest. So I would now add this to let's see, where's my mouse? I would add this to the interest group listing for nurses here. So magazines, and we have it. Basically, we're just going to keep iterating through until we find something that, or until we find enough interest groups that are really going to make sense for us to continue. So we want to look for events. We want to look for fan pages. We want to look for potentially stores. Think about the stores interest group or the brands interest group. Those would be great interest groups to target, because if you're, let's say, you like a store that sells nurse gear, right? Then you're pretty much kind of self-declaring that you're a buyer inside of this niche. You're a valuable person that I want to target because you fit into the interest group of brands or stores. And if you like a store, then you probably will be someone who might buy. So I want to check that out on Google. Maybe I'll do something as simple as nurse stores. And just kind of see what comes up. All Hearts, Scrubs and Beyond, Uniform Advantage, Lydia's Uniform, Scrubology. So another one. This is definitely one to kind of look into. Let's see where we're at here. So we could put stores, and we're just going to keep kind of iterating through all these until we find a lot of interest groups that we could then build interest within. So this is the first step. We're going to build this green bar and put in all of the different interest groupings that we can find. Then what we need to actually do is go inside of each interest group and identify as many interests as possible. So let's use the job title interest group as an example. We're going to go back into the Facebook ads editor, right inside here, and now we're going to build the actual interest group for the job title. So remember, that's under demographics. And now we're just going to type in nurse and look at all of the different iterations off of it. So nurse practitioner, nurse manager, nurse midwife, nurse consultant, nurse educator, nurse's assistant, nursemaid, nurse's aide. I think nursery worker, that might be the flower type nursery thing. So we might not want that. But remember the other iterations of it. Registered nurse. So look how important this one was to add to our group. If we didn't have it, we'd be at 73,000 people. Now what we want to do is go back into demographics, into work, into job titles. If we just stuck with what they gave us under nurse, we'd miss out on one of the biggest portions of nurse job titles in here, and that's registered nurse. So how would I know to search for registered nurse? Well, I live inside the niche for a little bit. I Google around, I look at different job titles, and I just see what's out there. I'm also keeping my eyes open. You see these other ones here. So registered nurse now leads me to 5 other job titles that I could pick, and we went from 73,000 to 580,000. We added 500,000 plus nurses to target now. So that's super powerful. We just made our audience about 7-8 times bigger. So that's super important to kind of go through. And then remember, they are going to give you some great suggestions as well. So I'm just clicking in this box. So I added a few that I added myself. Now I'm going to click back into the box. Look at all of these suggested job titles now. Nurse anesthesiast, operating room registered nurse, nursing instructor, CRNA, ICU nurse, RN change nurse, staff nurse. All of these are great job titles. These are all going to be used to build your actual job title interest group. So look at all these nurses that we have, 500, 600,000 nurses that we have just in the self-declared job title interest group. So what do we do next? We're going to take all of these, and for the sake of not needing to do this research again, we could either save the audience down here, or what I like to do, even though it takes a little bit longer, I'm actually going to go in and type up all of these in my spreadsheet. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to do it all right now. Registered nurse, ER nurse, ICU nurse, midwife nurse, etc., 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 etc. You're going to list them all, and then you're going to list the size of that interest group, and that's 600,000. Now, we're done with this interest group for now. We're going to come back to it and kind of fine-tune this audience with intersecting, but for now, this is all you need to do. So basically, we're gonna repeat this process until we build as many interest groups as possible. And we want to build as many as we can. Do not skip on this research. You're going to see as you go through this course, we're going to keep coming back to this interest group idea over and over and over. I don't care if it's section 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're talking about in every single section, we're going to be referencing these interest groups. So the research that you're doing now is really, really, really important. Don't skimp on it. The amount of interest groups that you have, remember, it's directly proportionate to the amount of money that you can make. So again, identify all the top level categories, then actually build out each individual interest group with the interests. Note them, save them somewhere so you don't need to do the research again. And then repeat the process as many times as you can until you build out as many interest groups as you could identify.